force field's down. What the? Hey, Monroe, get back up here! Some Borg just beamed in and they're...
The year is 1995. Hot on the heels of Star Trek The Next Generation, Star Trek Voyager was introduced. Was it just as good as The Next Generation? No, not even close. With that in mind though, I actually think Voyager was underrated by most. It was hardly the worst in the series, and I actually think Janeway was pretty likable as a captain, at least when she's not suffering from plot stupidity. Raven Software was tasked with making a video game about it, and not only did they manage to do that, but they made a first-person shooter, and it just turned 19 years old. While the US wouldn't receive it for 5 more days, it released in Europe in September 15th, 2000. To my knowledge, it and its sequel are the only Star Trek games to be first-person shooters, but the question is it any good? Being a first-person shooter, the biggest question is probably how the gameplay and plot would consolidate with each other. After all, if it was just a straight shooter, then it wouldn't feel very much like Star Trek, but if they go too heavy in the exposition, then it isn't going to be very fun as a shooter. I'm pleased to say it's reasonably well balanced, at least in my opinion. There are times where they're talking, or you're just going around Voyager, but there's also plenty of shooter action to keep you from getting bored. Your most basic weapon, of course, is a phaser, which recharges itself to ensure you always have some kind of weapon, but it's quite weak and unlikely to kill any more than 1 or 2 enemies before it runs out of juice. You, of course, also get more powerful weapons, such as a harder-hitting phaser rifle, a rapid-fire scavenger rifle, and an explosive grenade launcher that can also fire landmines. Beyond that, you've got a hard-hitting stasis weapon that can be scattered like a shotgun, a Tetrion pulse disruptor that fires fast and hard and bounces off walls, a photon burst that can fire homing shots, and an arc welder for just melting through things with. All of the weapons have secondary fire, such as the aforementioned landmines and homing shots, so feel free to experiment when you got the chance. Ammo isn't so scarce that you're afraid to shoot, but it's not so plentiful that you can afford to be reckless most of the time, so make sure you aim your shots and maybe use the phaser if there's only 1 or 2 enemies around. Health can either come from stations or, in at least one case, the holographic Voyager doctor fixing you up. Enemies include the usual, like human and Klingon mooks, and the Borg also show up later on, but there's also new ones like the Forge, which serve as the primary antagonists. Most enemies are straightforward, where you just shoot them until they die, but the Borg aren't that straightforward because they can actually adapt to your weapons, which forces you to switch them around. Luckily, 7 of 9 equipped you with an iMod weapon that's adapt-proof, but you have limited ammo, so use wisely. I was actually a little surprised at how straightforward the final boss was. I thought it looked like you might have to destroy the seed while the enemies are spawning in, but nope, you just kill all the enemies and the problem resolves itself. Then I thought a certain spot on the boss needed to be shot in order to do damage to it, but nope, it's just a bullet sponge and you just keep shooting until it's dead. I'm not overly disappointed, I just figured there was more to it. I've noticed that one mission encourages you to be stealthy. I'm not sure if it's required, and it probably isn't, but it definitely makes your life a lot easier if you don't alert everyone in sight, and I usually just quick load if I get spotted. Overall, it's a pretty standard and competent shooter with some downtime moments thrown in between to remind you that it's Star Trek. I personally had a lot of fun with it, but pure shooter buffs might be turned off by the breaks in the action. I like to think it was necessary to still give it the air of Star Trek, and very well balanced, but your mileage may vary on that one.
Mr. Monroe, your tactical approach was, shall we say, tactless.
Just in case the name somehow didn't manage to throw you off, the game's plot is based off of Star Trek Voyager, the show. The usual characters such as Captain Janeway, Tuvok, and my personal favorite Neelix appear in the game. Of course, there's just one problem. The dev team who made this game was contractually obligated to not allow the original cast to have the possibility of dying, so due to this, a new cast of original characters was made specifically for this game's universe. This cast of lovelies is known as the Hazard Team, essentially Voyager's go-to team for the more dangerous missions. I guess this is for the missions that the away team is too scared to do. As for the person you play as, he's the leader of the bunch, but you don't know him very well. His name is Ensign Monroe. In typical main character fashion, he's very headstrong and undisciplined, but learns what it takes to become a true leader and yada yada yada, all that nice stuff. Fittingly, it's Tuvok who's the one to scold Monroe when he fails a holodeck simulation of a Borg mission because he shoots a panel, and in a first for video games, it doesn't magically lower the force field. Instead, it causes a huge explosion that causes them all to die. Nicely done, Monroe. An alien ship soon appears and attacks Voyager, because of course it does. It creates a rift that takes them to an unknown region that's basically a giant graveyard for ships. If you're thinking this story isn't very original, then you'd probably be right, but it's certainly compelling enough that I'll let it slide. first order of operations is to deal with a scavenging ship consisting of humans, Klingons, Hirogen, and Malin. You know, typical Star Trek aliens. After dealing with those, you're tasked with shooting through an alien ship as you lose several members of your crew. Fortunately, it was just all a big misunderstanding because of not understanding each other's language. A translator is carried through for the two sides, peace is restored, the crew members were literally just sleeping, and you move on. From there, B'Elanna, the resident half-Klingon on Voyager who's prone to violent outbursts, discovers isodesium on the scavenger's base, so in good old do-unto-others fashion, you decide to sneak aboard and scavenge it for yourself. After grabbing it and everything seems to be going so well, surprise, surprise, it all turns to hell. The Borg show up, steal the isodesium, and Lieutenant Foster, because of course they do. You're tasked to infiltrate the Borg cube to get back the isotope, and if you can find the time, rescue your friend. Unfortunately, there was an invisible timer I wasn't aware of, and I failed to rescue him. Sorry, Foster. Eventually, the Borg offer a negotiation where they'll leave you unassimilated if you help them defeat Species 8472. Ordinarily, they'd be quite a hassle to deal with, but conveniently 7 of 9 modified your weapons to deal with them in what can only be described as plot convenience. Afterwards, the Borg intend to double-cross you, because of course Borg do, but Chang was prepared and detonates a bomb that destroys their fancy little crystal whose name I can't pronounce and allows you to escape with the isotope. Unfortunately, as is the norm, something also goes horribly wrong. The Forge, the main bad guys that brought you here and are responsible for the big ship graveyard, are sending a harvester to rip Voyager apart. You're tasked to go on a nearby spaceship and fire in your laser at the harvester to stop it. After fighting your way through the gunship, the harvester is disabled, but its crew still manages to make it onto Voyager, and you're required to fight them off. After that's over with, Janeway just wants to repair Voyager and get the hell out, but the others understandably don't like being sitting ducks, and they come up with a plan to infiltrate the Forge with their own harvester ship. Basically a Trojan horse in space, and it actually works. After making it in, their minds screwed by the big bad, and the empath on the team has to block it out to keep you all from losing your minds or whatever. You eventually make it to a dampening field and shut it down, allowing you to escape, but the big bad gently reminds Monroe that they're just going to do it all over again, so he ignores Tuvok's orders and goes to face it himself. After using his main character privilege to wreck the big bad in his little seat despite violating direct orders, the crew of Voyager realizes that Monroe was probably doing the right thing and he's promoted to lieutenant. Even Tuvok compliments Monroe, which as you probably can tell isn't easy for him to do that one with the whole strong monotone thing. Honestly, I found it rather enjoyable for what it was, and it definitely felt like it could have been a good episode of Voyager, or even a few episodes. Hell, with the right budget and writing and director, I think it could make a good Star Trek movie. Being a first-person shooter from 2000, you'd think it would conflict with the kind of storytelling Star Trek is known for, but I think they did a good job making it feel authentically like Star Trek while also a shooter. Being a 19-year-old game that uses the Quake 3 engine, the game's graphics have aged just a slight bit. The most humorous part for me is that their mouths aren't properly polygonal, they're given an animated texture so it gives off a style I can best describe as robot chicken-esque. Maybe the Hazard team is actually the Night Crew.
Night Crew! Fear me!
With that said, however, the environments and models overall aren't so aged that you can't appreciate the beauty within them, and the effects still hold up decently well. It has an option for volumetric shadows, but for some reason the Quake 3 engine always leads to glitches when you use that, so whether or not you want to enable it is up to you. If nothing else, there's enough fidelity that you can easily tell where you are and which human character is supposed to represent who. The voice acting and music are very Star Trek quality, of course, and as expected, the Voyager cast returns to do their roles. They're just as good as they are in the show, so if you like them in the show, you'll probably like them here.
Responded to a distress signal from a derelict vessel and it opened fire.
Tuvok, they don't respond to hails. Maybe we need to send a clearer message. Target their weapon systems and disable them.
Firing phasers. Direct hit. Phasers had no discernible effect.
Some may not like that as much, since Voyager doesn't exactly have a smooth reputation. The new characters also hold up just fine, with Monroe giving off a typical action hero voice, which is inoffensive and serviceable.
Monroe to Foster. I found the last piece of isodesium. There's a huge bay between us. There's a crane system of some sort, but the control room is on the other side.
It's especially nice when you're on Voyager, since it gives you a chance to sort of poke around the ship, although not all floors of the ship are available at once. I kinda wish there was some kind of post-game ability to just go anywhere you want on the Voyager ship to get a better feel for the environments, but you can always just quick save with each mission that takes place on it and enjoy it at your leisure. The game even has some FMVs for certain cutscenes, although they're obviously compressed because of their age, and I actually had to remove the opening from my Let's Play since it was flagged for both audio and video. The others, of course, seem to all be original content, unless the Forge actually was an episode I'm not familiar with. All in all, the game looks and sounds perfectly fine for having been released in 2000. It's got all the Star Trek aesthetic you could possibly want if you ask me. I find it very unfortunate that no other Star Trek games apart from the first two Elite Force games were made to be first-person shooters. While I can understand how it can conflict with things and not really be easy to pull off in a satisfying way, I think Raven Software managed to balance things very well, all things considered. While it may not be as good as the sequel that'd come after it, Voyager Elite Force was still a very enjoyable game. I highly recommend giving both of them a try if you're a fan of Star Trek, or just a fan of classic first-person shooter action, because you'll find plenty to love here on both fronts, if you can look past some minor blemishes. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time. Warp 9 engaged. Make it so.